No pressure, but we'll just okay.
Okay, yeah. Good evening, everyone. Day three, teaching reading in ESL. I think the next slide is on land acknowledgement. We just want to acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the homeland of the Red River Métis, Anishinaabe, Inawak, and Dakota Oyari peoples. Okay, so this is our agenda. Learn about teaching reading. We'll focus mostly on the pre, while, and post reading stages, right? And yeah, that homework. Okay, so basically it's almost the same structure as our listening, right? Pre, while, and post reading
Hmm.
activities, right? Yeah, so let's just go through this, Andrew. Yeah, you'll just read and let me know. Do you agree or disagree with these statements?
Do you want us to read them and react to them?
Yeah, right.
Okay, that's what reading is like listening, except that the input is written. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Comprehension means understanding all the words in the text. Not necessarily. We're reading for gist. Um, I don't even do that when I read everything. I just speed read sometimes for the point of the matter. Reading in the classroom means reading aloud sometimes.
Yeah.
Uh, Text should be simplified. That depends on the level of the student. You want to push them just beyond the edge of their capacity where they're at the moment. Otherwise, they won't reach for it. They won't risk it. Um, Reading is a good way to improve vocabulary. Absolutely. That's how I learned my vocabulary, and half the time use too much. I, I need to simplify it when I'm in the classroom.
Yeah.
If you can read well in your first language, you'll probably be able to read well in the second one. I would assume that you'd use the same strategies and techniques you've learned in your first language. You'd try to apply that to your second. Whether that works completely or not, I guess we'll learn about right now.
Right. Yeah. Yes. That's totally good. Yeah. So reading purposes and strategies. So there's not no that more than one way of reading may be possible. For example, instructions for installing a computer monitor. So yeah, your what is the reason for reading in this case? Information. So you're reading for information. What do you think is the way of reading when you're looking at the instructions? How to install a computer monitor? Maybe scanning for specific information. Right? You want to find out how do we put this, like how to plug it, or like how to install the specific part, right? What do you think about a text message from a friend? Is it for pleasure or for information? It depends.
That depends if I'm in the middle of taking an engine apart and I need advice.
Uh-huh. Right. And way of reading would be, is it closed, skimming for gist, or scanning for specific information? Yeah, it depends if you're like, as you said, if it's an advice, like you
Right.
probably want close reading, right? So these are examples. The evening's programs in a TV guide. Would that be for pleasure or for information? Maybe information,
It'd be information, yeah.
right?
Sorry.
That's okay. A newspaper report of a sports event.
That's both.
Yes, a short story.
Yeah, definitely for pleasure. If
That's
it's a story as opposed to if it's nonfiction versus fiction.
yeah. Lena, feel free to butt in if you have any comments. Okay. Yeah, look at this. Reading in a second language. Are you familiar with Esperanto?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was proposed as an alternative, a simplified language to become a world language, if I understand
Yeah,
correctly, but it never really took off.
right. Yeah, and if you're given these specific texts, right? Read this text and let's try to answer these questions. What kind of text is it? What do you think is it? Yeah, it has a photo, there's a headline, and it says it's from the Esperanto website,
Hmm.
gxanglo.com. So it's most likely a news clip, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah, definitely news.
so would we know what happened and where? Where is this place exactly? It was funny because last term I had a not Japanese, Spanish speaking student, and he understood everything. He understood this text, so he was able to answer the questions like how many people died, how
Hmm.
many survived, and what was happening at the time, right? But
Yes.
of course, would you know the answer to those questions?
Sorry, can you restate?
Yeah, would you like just by looking at this text, would you be able to
Yeah,
what?
I was able to answer all the questions.
Wow,
Yeah,
these
at least I think I did. I knew it was a newsprint or a news article. I knew that it was a fire.
uh-huh.
I knew that it was in a little place called Beni Safaro or whatever,
Right.
150 kilometers
Yes.
from Cairo in Egypt.
Yes.
32 dead, 100 injured, and it happened at some festival.
100 injured. Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
I'm assuming those are the answers, but anyways. So
Yeah.
I was surprised how much you could actually parse out of it.
Right. Yeah. So, what does this tell you about reading in a second language?
I just used the habits I have reading regular stuff in my first language, and it worked pretty good.
Right. And okay, so what can the teacher do? So you will soon be teaching, right? What can you do to help learners understand a text like this one? So that there comes like the strategies,
Hmm.
yeah, that you can use to teach reading, right? Yes. So yeah, so this is
Just
the
relax and try it.
huh?
Just
Right.
relax and try it and see how far you can go with what you already have in your kit.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, we'll go through steps 1 to 5, and this is basically
Mhm.
the stages for teaching reading, right? Of course, it starts with selecting the text, right? So teachers are responsible. In my class, I use because I teach pre-level 1 students, right? Not they're not even in the foundations level. So I select the text for it. Like there is a specific textbook, right? And then every chapter or every unit will have a different theme, right? So understanding the purpose, we'll have like pre-reading activities like familiarizing with the vocabulary, and then while reading activities and post-reading activities, right? So the most important thing here as like is the same way that you did for your listening lesson plan, right? You'll use scaffolding, right? Regardless of the purpose of your reading activity, right? It has to start with an easier one, and then a little more challenging, and then the final application, right? So those are the stages. Those are stages of a reading lesson in a logical order. Yeah, so this is kind of like what would be the first one here? Yeah, 2, 4, 6, 8. 8 stages. So what would be the first one? What do you think? It's a lot of
No,
items here.
you just want to scan through them,
Yeah,
but check detailed understanding by asking multiple choice questions. So that'll draw them in. Focus on vocabulary. Yeah, this is similar to what we do with I guess any skill. Use a picture to generate interest in the topic, so engaging them. Ask the
oh, and
learners.
yeah, before you continue, what do you think would be the first one?
The first one.
Yeah, the first one that we should do, the first stage
Oh, okay. I see
of a
what you're saying.
reading lesson. What will be the first one? So remember we talked
Yeah,
about
we try to
active.
engage them, so I'd go with a picture and start
Yeah,
to generate interest in the topic.
that's right. And then after that,
You
ask
put
them.
me on the spot here. There's-
How about
Let's see.
asking them to predict the context of the
The
text?
title.
Mhm.
No. I'm going to scan through these questions, focus on the vocabulary.
So letter C, letter H, and letter F, that will all be activating the interest of your
Okay.
students, right? So the title and
Okay. Yep.
vocabulary. And what would be the next?
Well, then we start getting them into the text itself.
Yes, right.
Read the text quickly, try to get the gist of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Let's see what else we got here. Them looking for detail,
Right.
bring out the vocabulary probably, because that's in there several times,
Mm-hmm.
and the grammar structure.
Right. Yeah. The last three would be the post reading activity.
Yeah, post-reading activity.
Check
Yeah.
their check detailed understanding by asking multiple choice questions. That is the easier one. And you can also ask learners to talk about their personal response to the text and its topic, right? So that would be a little more difficult, more challenging one, right? So letter G is also a productive activity, right? You
Mhm.
can ask learners to underline each instance. For example, you're teaching simple present tense, right? So the first would be letter G, and then letter A, and then letter E. So that will be scaffolding. First, you have the material, they will just passively underline, right?
Mhm.
And then the next one will be multiple choice questions, a little harder, right? But the
Mhm.
hardest part of it is when you ask them about their personal response to the text, right? So this time they're going to think about it. They will apply more vocabulary words in that
Mhm.
case. Do you have any questions about that, Andrew?
No, I understand
Okay,
grouping it.
sure. Elena, if you can hear us and you have any questions, let us know. Okay, so pre-reading strategy.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
I can hear no questions. So all good.
Okay. Wonderful. So now we'll go through some strategies for pre-reading activity. Right? So we have 8 strategies here. So it's like gallery walk. So the first reading activity is brainstorming. Yeah. Have you ever done this in any of your classes?
Done it in lots of meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
brainstorm.
yeah.
First.
Get all the ideas on the table without judging them to try to get people activated and get good ideas
Yeah. So
or good solutions.
exactly. So the same thing for pre-reading, they will just write, whatever ideas they have related to that particular topic, right? So if your topic is about wildfires, for example, right? So they can write concepts, ideas without organizing them, just writing them down would be a good way to activate their interest, right? And how about group discussion? Is it applicable for all levels? For a period, I don't usually do this because you do, Elena?
Yeah, so just wanna like want you to repeat the question. Is this like are you asking if this stage appropriate for all skills? Like when you teach this listening and reading?
Not so we're talking so specifically for the reading pre-reading activity. So my question is, do you think we can use group discussion to activate the interest regardless of the level of your students? As then I was saying, I don't usually do this in my class because my class is like pre-foundations level. So
Mhm.
yeah, group discussion would normally be maybe at the end, but not in the beginning, like when they are already equipped with, some concepts that they can use. But
Mhm.
yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I mean, if it's a group with a higher level, that would be
Mhm.
hard to sparkle like this brainstorming,
Right.
to pull
Yes.
this nerve out of them. So it's kind of noisy here. But yeah, I think like even for 4 or 5 CLBs, that would be a good activity.
Right. How about concept mapping, the third one? Andrew, have you tried?
Not is that like semantic
Yes, you're right.
mapping? So organizing and trying to organize the different topics and the information that's available so you can kind of understand the flow or the relationship of the information.
Yeah, perfect. Yes.
But this isn't pre-reading, right?
Yeah,
This is
pre-reading.
okay, so we're not in the text yet. So
Yeah.
how do you use that in a pre-reading
Oh,
environment?
yeah, that is a very good question. So concept mapping means like try to predict, for example, so the relationship between different words, right? So that is one example of concept mapping. So that means like you give them several concepts for them. Okay, maybe what do you think is the relationship, between these and these words? Let's say you're teaching, for example, the reading material is about, what is a good example there? About, let's see, um, that will be applicable for concept mapping. Oh, okay. How about natural disasters? Right? So you give them these different concepts. For example, you want them to learn about the concept of fire, right? And then these are the things that you need to know when there's fire or when there is earthquake, right? Or the different terms that are associated with specific natural disasters, right? So concept mapping could be a good way to get your students to predict, or maybe also use pictures that they can also map with specific concepts, right? With the assumption that they don't know, they're not familiar with a different what do you call this, disasters, natural disasters, right? So they have, yeah, but this one you have to have specific materials that are taken from the reading, from the terminologies, from the vocabulary words, right, from the reading. So it can either be matching different terminologies, or getting them to think. It's close to brainstorming, um, but the difference is the words are given, right, for concept mapping. For brainstorming, the students will think of their own words, but for concept mapping, they could match the different concepts that are given on that material, right? So it's somehow a test for them, a test for about their level of knowledge for the different terminologies in terms of natural disasters. Okay, does that help?
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Yes.
visual aids, right? So visual aids, I think some of you have used visual aids in the listening lesson plan, where they have pictures, right? Or different maybe realia to get to activate their interest, right? For example,
Mhm.
if they're gonna listen to a recipe, for example, then they could have pictures of cereal, for example, or milk, or whatever they need to. Vocabulary preview. How is it different from brainstorming and concept mapping? Some of you used flashcards, right, in the pre-listening activity. That is a good vocabulary preview, right? How about structural organizers? Yeah, you know what? We have these. We have the materials for a specific one. Brainstorming, we have this passion that we talked about. So look at this. Brainstorm individually. There are visual aids here, and they can write down anything that they know about the topic, and it reflects related. So this is pretty much the same as brainstorming, but they could match. Like for example, dogs have four legs, right? Dogs have mammals, but it could be multiple, right? So in terms of natural disasters, you could have words there, and then they could put those words together, right? So fire, earthquake, and all the other natural disasters. And this is for visual aids. Vocabulary previews. You can list all words in the assignment that may be important for students to understand, and they have sort of vocabulary activities. What are structural organizers? Is it useful for lower level or for all levels? Call attention to specific plans of paragraph or text organization. So you have signal words, right? This is one of my favorites. Signal words, main idea sentences, headings, and subtitles. So what you do is there are specific examples that you could give, right? So for example, cost effect. So if you have a model, this is the cost and this is an effect, depending on what you're teaching. Are you teaching on the sentence level or the paragraph level, right? So if it is in the sentence level, you have a model. So this is the cause, this is the effect, this is the problem, this is the solution. So it's like, yeah, my best practice is always before I ask my students to give examples, I give one example as a model and they follow. Yeah, the only difficult thing there is when they always use your model, and they, for example, your sentence is about the wildfire is due to climate change. So they will start giving sentences that starts with the earthquake is like so I usually give at least 2-3 examples so that they will have that flexibility, right? They will not always follow the same. Yeah, are you familiar with KWL?
No, this is the first time I saw this.
Okay, KWL is let's say if in the businesses we have KWs, right? Know your customer. I think that's KYC. This one is you have to understand your students, and this is accomplished through needs assessment or diagnostic test, right? So what do students already know about this topic, right? That's know. W is what do students want to know about the topic? What are they interested to know about that specific reading material, right? And L, but this will only be after, after completing the reading material, then they will go back and write down what they have learned, right? I remember I taught several intensive academic classes at Robertson College, and we used KWL a lot. Yeah, survey is also a good pre-reading activity. They will look through title and subtitles, bolded and italicized words, images, so that they can gain a better understanding. Right? So there is a survey of the text, right, at the beginning. So you have the text before beginning to read. And yeah, so this is a teaching scenario. Did you try? Did you try looking through this teaching scenario and answering the questions? Andrew, have you got this far?
I just read it briefly, but no, I didn't go through the exercise. I didn't have time to
Okay.
do it.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe you could look at it
I
later.
mean, there's stuff in here that whether students could be confused by, depending on their familiarity with technology and iPod. Where is Peterborough, Ontario?
Right.
Um, what's a country style bistro drive-through?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
Yes.
Do they know what good life is? So there's a bunch of things in here that's that would have to be taught, or people would have to be informed because it's specific to a context that
Mm-hmm.
a second, English, an L2 learner wouldn't know this coming to Canada, from any background information they'd have in their home country.
Yeah, that
Maybe
is
maybe
true.
they'd know a Starbucks if the Starbucks was listed here. But
Uh-huh.
other than that,
Yeah, that's right. That is so perfect. Like because you have been dealing with newcomers, right, and immigrants, right, in Canada. So uh, there are many references, cultural and contextual, that we should re-teach because not everybody understands, Canadian culture, for example. Okay, so we're done with the pre-reading activities. Now, up to while reading activities. Yeah, we have discussed a lot of this, like skimming, right? Scanning for specific information. Because when we did listening, I think we talked about pointing out the role of these course markers, the think, pair, share activity, and semantic mapping, and summarize passages. Okay, so which of these do you think would be useful for while reading activities? I think we're familiar with skimming and scanning already, right? Um, Find out the role of discourse markers. What are some of the discourse markers?
well, those would be linking words
Yes.
that kind of hang different statements together so they can understand how that happens or how the words connect.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Think, pair. Have you used this before? Think, pair, share activity. After, yeah, well, so while reading, they're gonna have their own interpretation, and then so they read independently, and then next they will pair up with someone, and then they will share what, yeah, their understanding, or if they have questions about that particular reading activity, right? Semantic mapping or clustering.
well, again, that's back to organizing
Yes.
concepts and just kind of organizing the information in the text itself and
Yeah.
tracking the relationships.
Right. And of course, summarizing passages. I don't do this in my pre-foundations level class because they're not there at that level yet. So especially I have, a couple of
Mhm.
students who are really very, 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 very low level, but you can always customize, for your students. Generating interaction between schemata and text. Gist. Okay.
Is there a in the amongst these six different activities, are there certain activities here that work better for beginner levels, like stage one levels
Oh, yeah, that's a very,
versus later levels?
yeah, a very good question. So while reading activities, my for pre-foundations level, in terms of vocabulary, right? Instead of pointing out the role of discourse markers, let's say if they are learning, let's say imperative verbs, right? So that is one. So you'll pick a specific focus, right? And let them, understand at least 5 imperative verbs taken from that specific reading material, right? So that is one strategy for beginners. There are many other strategies that are not here that you could also use. Let's say getting them to, so in terms of while reading, asking the specific main idea, like it's a short paragraph, for example, and then what is the main idea? So what is a specific topic? You'll just ask them one word, right? Let's say if we're talking about natural disasters, so then they can say, what's another word for natural disasters? Maybe, or maybe emergency, for example, right? So what is the topic of this 5 or 10 sentence paragraph? Because it's just for the beginner, right? So asking them for main idea, that is the goal, or asking them for the specific topic of that, or maybe asking them to give what would be a good title for this particular, so you read the material, and then they can they can talk to a partner, and then they can decide together what could be a good, let's say, title for this particular reading material, right? So those are possible for beginners. Yeah. But in terms of summarizing, I think they are not, like, depending, of course, on, they could be beginners, but are they advanced beginner level? It depends, right? Yeah, so we're off to the post-reading activities. So here comes the like inferential questions, which we normally use, right? Make inferences from the writer's ideas. So we'll ask how, why, some prediction questions. What do you think would happen next, right? So you have a reading material, or there could be no ending, or it's like open-ended. So these are inferential questions. It's a good post-reading activity. We also have critical evaluative questions. Like what does that mean to you? It says make personal judgments. Critical evaluative. It's all about the reading material. Agree or disagree with the writer's point of view. You can also create a closed exercise, like a summary with words that are deleted at predetermined levels. So, a summary, and then they will write the missing. So at first, probably you have the words given there, and they will just put in the blank. Yeah, I do this in my class. So there are, let's say, 10 vocabulary words that you will put in the blanks. Right? And then the next one will be more, so in terms of scaffolding, the next one will be more difficult. Instead of having the 10 vocabulary words, then you could get them to write, they will probably have the spelling incorrect, written incorrectly, and all those, but that's a good opportunity to, understand, like, how far, like how many words do they actually remember, right, from that particular reading activity. Yeah, there are some others, like use information gap charts, jigsaw reading. We've done this before in our class, where you have 10 sentences that you will arrange, right, according to how it happened, depending on your focus. Is your focus on, the sequence of the events, right? Or they can look at the transition words, like first, second, third, and finally, right? So they can arrange a jigsaw reading. And of course, follow up vocabulary and writing tasks. Right, so these are some of the ideas for the post-reading activities. Right, can you think of other ideas that are not yet included here? Like after reading, what could be a good a lot of times we also do reflections, like what have you learned, what is the moral story of this article or of this passage? Yes,
Can it,
yeah,
yeah, question, can it be like role play, or
of
like
course.
taking turns
Yeah,
reading material,
yeah,
maybe?
yes, of course. Yeah, getting them to write a script, right? Yes, that a role play is a great one.
What about write the next chapter?
Right? Yes, that's a good one.
If you're using an open-ended piece of text, they could try to write what's next
Yeah, that's wonderful.
using the vocabulary.
Yeah, we could do that. First, yeah. Let's ask that. Let's put that down. If I could. Yeah, but those are good ideas. Those are really good ideas for post reading activities. Okay, we're gonna skip the sample reading text here on Pocket Talk, but we'll just or yeah, we could look at it. We could look at it since we only have the last slide. This is the Mexican. Are you familiar with this? Pocket Talk. What features of the text?
The only version that I ever read about this was when they didn't use a ball. They still had something round, but it wasn't a ball. It was, and the victors weren't very gracious to the defeated.
Right. So, what features might help understanding and what might make it difficult to understand? So maybe this photo would be a good a good cue, right? And what features might make it difficult to understand? Hope and hope. Yeah, maybe because we're not familiar with this game. We don't know the rules of these games, right? The game is no longer played,
Yeah, there's no common, it's not something you normally talk about.
right? Yeah,
The graphic itself is difficult to understand what exactly is happening.
exactly. So, what are the pre, while, and post reading activities? It says design at least one pre-reading, while reading. Yeah. So, if you will be presenting this for the while reading activity, so it could be using it could be yeah. So, based from what we discussed, the pre-reading could be teaching them the vocabulary words that are used here, right? What could be a good pre maybe ask them, are you familiar with this, right?
Maybe, yeah, maybe also ask them to see it, like to look at the picture and guess what are they like, what's this game about,
That,
or what, yeah, they can come up with their own, like their rules. I mean, looking at the picture according to what they see, and
yeah,
then compare it with the actual ones.
that's right. Yes. Yeah. And then while reading activity could be what could be a good while reading activity for this one? Maybe notice the
Depending on the level, trying to summarize each of the paragraphs
yeah,
to
that's
pull out the key point in each.
right. Yeah, right. Like, or maybe while reading, they can take notes, outline, right? The rules. So rules, number one, number two, number three, right? So that also possible. Summarizing is post reading, right? So now that you have read, right? So what can you say about the Mexican ball game, Pocato? Is it interesting, right? So summarize. Um, you can think of a variation, right? If you were to make the rules, right? What would that be? What is one thing that you will change, right? So those are the things that will get them, thinking about the text and beyond the text, right? Okay, so these are the reflection questions. We don't necessarily need to go through all of this right now, but we could post these reflection questions on the discussion so that folks would have an opportunity to answer them. For example, the first one, what is the advantage of choosing reading texts that are accompanied by illustration, diagrams, or maps? I think the answer is pretty straightforward, right? And number two, what are the advantages of using authentic rather than texts that have been specifically written or adopted for classroom purposes?
Mhm.
Right? Why is setting a task in advance of reading a good idea? Right? Your students would like to know, right? What is the purpose here? Right? We talked about the purpose of reading earlier, right? And what is matching the task to the text mean? So that would probably a good discussion question. And why is it sometimes a good idea to let learners compare their answers to reading comprehension questions? So this is a think, pair, share opportunity. Should learners be allowed to consult dictionaries while reading? What is the alternative? So there are various possible answers for these questions that we would like to. I will be posting this on the discussion on Nexus, and you'll have an opportunity to write your responses there. Okay. Do you have any questions for me?
No,
Questions? Okay.